The best way to describe it is reality itself is there's something off, it's like you're not living in your everyday life. Like the flow state has been switched. I look at my hands and I'd be like, well, what's going on? Like that's when like I started having like vision problems. That's where the kind of the feeling of like a dream-like state, things just don't feel right. Reality's just kind of really out of whack for me, but everything's normal, right? And outside in everyone's life, everything's just completely normal. But in my world, I'm like, what is going on? I was skeptical in some things. Like, I don't know, this just sounds too good to be true on how to recover. But no, it is good. And it is true that you can recover.
Hey everyone, I'm Shaun O'Connor, creator of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Austin Ellis, 25 years old, from Tennessee, USA. Austin's experience with depersonalization derealization disorder began after smoking weed from a vape pen, triggering a state of unreality that would come and go over the next couple of years. His DPDR lasted on and off for about 5 years in total, and during that time Austin experienced a wide range of symptoms, many of which will sound very familiar to people watching. His main challenges included feeling constantly off or not quite present, feeling stuck in a dreamlike state, a deep sense of disconnection from himself and the world, and persistently questioning reality itself. Looking back, Austin says it felt like he experienced almost every DPDR symptom imaginable, but those were the ones that caused the most distress. But thankfully, after downloading the DP Manual recovery course, Austin began to see some very positive changes. I also coached Austin personally via Zoom, answering his questions and guiding him through some of the most persistent symptoms. And since then, Austin has made a complete recovery. He recently wrote to me and said, "I just want to thank you for everything you've done. Your manual is a lifesaver. I can finally say I've walked away from DPDR, and I know that it's going to stay away because of what I've learned. I've been fine for months now. I just honestly forgot to reach out. But I'd love to hop on a call and tell my story to help other people." And today, Austin is here to do exactly that, to share his experience with long-term DPDR, what finally helped him break the cycle, and what life feels like now that he's fully moved on. Austin, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Austin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm 25. I live in Tennessee. I have worked on I have an entertainment brand that I've been working on and stuff like that. And I also work at a minefield out here in Tennessee, running heavy equipment. And so I'm just kind of just finding hobbies and kind of going about life.
So between heavy equipment and an entertainment brand, that's a pretty broad spectrum of interests,
Yeah, it's definitely probably the craziest. People would see me that I work, put on my beats and I go to work and, you know, um, and then all of a sudden you see me with a camera and you see me messing around having a podcast or doing street interviews or stuff like that. Like, recently I just did something with this chicken spot. It's a pretty big branch of a chicken spot called Hattie B's. We just shot something over there and we've got a lot down the pipeline that it's kind of crazy that yeah, you would see me, working the field that I work with and all the guys that I hang out with at work, and I'm completely different from all of them, and not in a bad way, but I really love entertainment. Love filming, editing, anything that deals with content.
Fantastic. I always find that once you kind of decide to walk on that path, the path seems to kind of manifest itself.
Yeah,
because you really have to make the decision and commit to it, though.
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. And it's yeah. Once you've been given that path and everything seems clear on it, you just gotta kind of act of what you want to do, and they'll get you where you're at. Like right now on TikTok, I got like 47,000 followers.
Wow.
So yeah.
I've only got like 2,000.
Hey, it's hard, it's hard. My algorithms are messed up on it right now. And you'll see how I've had my three main ones picked up out of, from quite some time, but other than that, like right now, my algorithms are not picking up. I only get 400 views, and it's frustrating. But you kind of got to find your breakthroughs.
Yeah, yeah, and you got to be consistent with it and keep coming up with new ideas and stuff. But man, if you've got what was it, 47,000,
Yeah,
you're obviously doing something right. That's fantastic, man. Good for you. Good for you.
yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah. So Austin, can you tell us a bit about your experience with DPDR and how did it start for you?
Yeah, so when I was 20, I was, partying with some friends and I was drinking and my buddy had a pen and I was like, "Hey, let me see that." And we had this term out here what we call we're blinkering it out. And it's where you can hit it as long as you can till it just cuts off. And I think I made it to 11 seconds and I was like I was fine. I was just like really messed up and then I went and laid down and I just something felt really, really off. And I was like, all right, well, I'm just gonna sleep it off. And I woke up, kind of going throughout my day. I'm like, all right, everything's fine. Uh, I felt a little off all day, and then went back to my house that later at night, and then I smoked a joint, and then before you know it, I was just having a panic attack. I was like, what's going on? And from that moment, I was very confused, like very confused with what was going on. Why am I panicking? What, this and that. And then on and off, like people would be like, oh, just smoke weed. And so like I'd take a week off of weed and then I'd smoke. And then I was like, oh, this wouldn't be it was just so much going on and to that point that like I kind of like I pushed weed away and been like, I just wouldn't know what's going on. I'm like freaking out over nothing. It feels like, it's just like reality itself. The best way to describe it is reality itself is there's something off, it's like you're not living in your everyday life. Like the flow state has been switched. And now that you can see that, and you know, at that point when I was going through that, I would, I told myself, I was like, all right, well, I don't know what this is. I didn't look it up. I just thought it was anxiety. And I said, and then naturally over the course, I moved out of my mom's house, got a new job, all this stuff. And I kind of just didn't put my focus to it, but like it was always on the back of my mind. I was like, what was that? Like even when I would go back, I would start smoking weed again. Everything's fine. But I would go back and I'd be like, well, what was that? And I don't want that to come back again. And over time, when really stressful moments would come on, it would come back, and I'm like, wow, this feels weird, and I was like, well, I've gotten through it once, I can get through it again. And so, yeah, that happened for quite some time for the first 2 years of dealing with that, from the end of 2020 to the beginning of 2021. And 2022, it wasn't as broad, it was just kind of like it would still be on the back of my head because I was like, why do I end up feeling like this sometimes? And then I would say 2023 was probably the year that I didn't deal with it the most. It wasn't on my mind. I had a lot going on. I lived with a bunch of people. So like my mom was always going other places. And then 2024, I remember one night I hit a bowl of weed and just sent me into a panic. And I was messed up for probably about 2 weeks then. That panic attack, that panic attack, I couldn't go to sleep. It almost did. I was so tired, but I couldn't go to sleep. If you ever had that feeling in your journey, I'm sure it's just you're so afraid to go to sleep, but you want to go to sleep, and your body's not like, I don't know. It's just the weirdest thing. I kind of, yeah, 2024 was a little bit rough, and then moved out from my buddy's house. I moved into this house that I'm in right now. And last year in February is where it sent me into the biggest DPDR state I like ever was in. And like normally when I was like going through it on those spurts, on and off, it was like something felt off, like things don't feel right, but like it would just kind of like, be like it would just go back to my I just focused on other things. And then when I got to the point that here, it was just like it was just everything was just throwing out of whack, and that's where I started experiencing all the symptoms underneath the book.
At any point in that journey up until that point, Austin, did you come across the term depersonalization, derealization?
In 2024, I did, but I was so scared to even look at it because I thought it was the term past anything of anxiety or depression. I feel like was so scary that I didn't want to tell myself I had anything. Like someone brought it up to me, and I was like, that I don't know. I just would revert away from it because you know, until you really look at what it really is. I feel like to me it was a scary name until I did my research and I was like, "Oh, it's the third most, common practical mental health issue, past, depression and anxiety." So, once you find out that it's kind of like a softer, like, "Oh, this is not bad," but like I feel like to the blind eye, like someone reading that, like I don't know, that name itself just scared me alone. So that's why I didn't research it until uh last year.
Right, right. So it sounds like after the first experience with it, it was kind of coming and going. You were able to see that there was ups and downs associated with it, and then from time to time it would kind of rear up, and then and specifically if you had a bad weed experience, it would get very bad again. So it was kind of would I be correct in saying that, Austin, that it was a kind of it was ups and downs over the course of the first or maybe 2 years or thereabouts, and then it kind of became extremely difficult.
Yeah, for the first 2 years, it was ups and downs, and then 2023 going into that year, I didn't really like everything was just good in life. Everything was flowing right. So it wasn't until 2024, and I remember sitting in 2024, and I was talking to a buddy. I said, I really think I've like conquered anxiety, and then not too much long after that, you get smacked right back down again, and it shows you. No, you're not, So it's like um that right there kind of showed me. I was like, okay. So yeah, I would say ups and downs, really good points. Like there was times in that 5 years that like it really didn't mess with me for long periods of times. I mean, there was times where it would be kind of like, once a month or every 2 or 3 months. It was a weird. I mean, so when I'm listening to the DP manual, and I was like, well, all these people that I'm hearing that on their stories of the recoveries, I was like, I haven't really heard. Usually, it's a pretty persistent condition for a lot of people. It's like they're stuck in for a while, but I don't, I feel like everyone is different, and I don't know if some people are easier to distract their minds on it more easily on some things, especially if I didn't know what it was. So it was not like I'm gonna sit here and focus on this and stuff like that. The only thing I ever really did was look up anxiety. I think I did look up the one thing. This is one thing I did do looking up depersonalization was out of body. It said out of body experiences and stuff like that. And I was like, well, I don't really have outer body experiences at that time. Now I've went through that, now it's like now I know what that feels like. So but at that time I didn't really I was like, no, I've never really felt like I was out of my body. It's just I only feel off. So and yeah, I just kept on trucking through it. And then uh until last year when I had that panic attack, and then I was like, well, what's going on now? I was like, I haven't had this in a really long time. And so I started looking up, symptoms, and then I came across depersonalization, and then from coming across depersonalization uh on YouTube, I mean, I seen your recovery videos before anything. I mean, I looked up your channel, and then I kind of was watching your videos, and I was like, oh crap. I mean, I seen that you had a manual, and I was like, all right. I mean, I seen that you had one-on-one coaching, and I was like, all right, that's even better. And I was like, you know what? We're going to figure this out. So,
So it's actually quite common for people to have it intermittently and quite common for people to have it consistently. What's really interesting is that the people who have it consistently worry that, why don't I have the type that's intermittent? And then the people who have it
Yeah.
intermittently worry that why don't I have the type that's consistent, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, the way I like to describe it is in the simplest terms is that to think of like all you're going through ultimately is all you're experiencing is your levels of anxiety going up and down over time. That's all that's happening. DP and DR are symptoms of anxiety. So when your levels of anxiety go up, they feel stronger. When the levels of anxiety drop down, they feel less strong, and they go up and down over time. For some people, that level may stay at like 5 or 6 out of 10, for a consistent period of time, and then start changing again. For other people, it can be like very kind of intense ups and downs where they might have a couple of days where they feel completely fine, and then it kind of ramps up again. But ultimately, that's all it is. It's just a spectrum. It's your levels of anxiety changing over time. And the worry that there's somehow maybe different types of this because one is intermittent and consistent is just, and this is a worry I would have had too, but it's just a very unnecessary worry and complication about what's actually a very, very simple process about people experiencing different levels of anxiety at different times. That's all.
Yeah.
The other thing as well you mentioned was really interesting, Austin, was the thing of like being scared to look at depersonalization, look it up
Yeah.
because so the people talk to me about this all the time. Um, because the phrase depersonalization disorder, it sounds really, really scary when you see it first. And you're like,
Yeah.
and I
It
was
really.
like, oh no,
Yeah.
oh no, I don't want that. Shut down the
Yeah.
computer, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas in actual fact, like the term disorder, certainly in this context, all it's saying is that it's it's lasting longer than it should do. That's all.
Mhm.
It's just a categorization. So the things of depersonalization are symptoms of anxiety, and disorder just means that it's happening longer than it should do. So, the example I always like to give is like take somebody who has 3 panic attacks over the course of a month. They're experiencing panic attacks, right? But if that person has 30 panic attacks over the course of a month, that's categorized as panic disorder, right?
Yeah.
But at no point is it anything other than panic attacks. It's just panic attacks, right? But the consistency and severity of them, that is what leads to the categorization of panic disorder. But the term panic disorder sounds a lot more scary than I had a couple of panic attacks. And the same with depersonalization. I briefly had a feeling of of being kind of cut off from reality. Oh, that's weird. That's okay. But then I have depersonalization disorder. Sounds like it's this whole other world of a thing, and it's really
Oh,
not. It's just those symptoms persisting longer than they should. But I certainly had that with like when I saw the term depersonalization disorder first, I was like, oh my God, what have I done to myself? Like, and then that also kind of can prevent you from addressing it because you're like, this can't be what I have.
yeah.
Like I
It's your
can't
denial.
yeah, I can't even start
Yeah.
to try and understand what this is like, because even though the symptoms may be consistent, like I can't have a disorder. It sounds terrifying, and it really isn't. It's just a categorization. Um, Austin, you've mentioned a few of these in passing, the symptoms. Can you just go into a bit more detail about the symptoms you experienced across this whole time?
Okay. Yeah. So I mentioned the one where felt off. That was my most probably common one. When I really went into the strongest point, I would say at first it started when I very first talked to you, it started as feeling off. And then with our first coaching call, after that is I started experiencing like an outer body experience. And first time going through that, like you really don't know what's going on. I remember I was actually listening to one of your recovery stories, And I don't know, I just was in a machine, and I just, throughout the day I felt off. And then also I'm like, I'd look at my hands and I'd be like, well, what's going on? Like that's when like I started having like vision problems. That's where the feeling of like a dream-like state was really starting to come in. And I was like, things just don't feel right. Reality's just kind of really out of whack for me, but everything's normal, right? And outside in everyone's life, everything's just completely normal. But in my world, I'm like, what is going on? You know, why do the trees look so green? I don't know, like just, um, just everything, like perceptions of just things would look really weird, like shapes and especially from long distances. If you look at something and it almost, I remember going through one. It was like the 2D kind of looking effect. Like I would look at something and it just kind of like it's 3D, but it's just if you stare at it long enough, you're gonna be like, oh crap, that looks like 2D. Which was one of the weird ones. I remember waking up and I called off of work that day because of some family stuff going on. And I was like, everything's okay, like I've been fine. And then I remember just starting to take a shower because I had a really, really intense dream. Like I went to McDonald's and I remember like them serving me orange juice, but it was weird. Like when the orange juice spilled on my hand and it felt warm. And so I was like, I woke up and I went to go take a shower. So when I was taking a shower, I just started having this panic attack. Like, oh my God, am I stuck in a dream? Like, is this a dream? And it like, oh, that it just started this kind of affecting. So the next couple, that was probably one of the longest symptoms to get away from, because like I remember being at work and things would really feel off because I'm like, I'm questioning, am I in a dream or am I in a normal day living? uh so going through that was definitely one of the hard ones, because I remember waking up one morning and I tell my buddy, I'm like, I call him because he's on the way to work. I didn't have work that day. It was on a Saturday. And I said, dude, I feel like I'm stuck in a dream. Like, I don't know what's going on. And I remember looking up something about feeling like I'm stuck in a dream. And this is after me and you've already talked and everything, I think for the second time, because we had two coaching calls. And I remember it said something about schizophrenia. And I lost my mind. I was like, holy crap. And that's when I had a therapist at that point, and he was like, you're not schizophrenic or nothing. We hopped on a call later that or pretty, like, not so long after, later that morning, we hopped on a call and kind of talked through. But yeah, that was a really tough symptom to kind of get through. Uh, was definitely feeling like waking up and you're like, holy crap, what's in this? And then the disconnection was another big one. I remember feel like I would just be riding around in my town that I've lived in for the past 13 years, and these back roads that I grew up on like have so much sympathy, like empathy for. And it's like I've had so many memories around these areas. um and I would like I go to my mom's and it just nothing felt kind of right. I was like, I was just there was like a um blank expressions is the best, or I don't know how I could really say it, but like just I couldn't have no like affection. Like, I would, but like it's just like I didn't feel nothing. Like it just kind of just the feeling of nothing towards anyone was definitely kind of weird. Uh those were like definitely the weirdest. Like I remember a time, I don't even know, I can't even remember how it started now. That's the crazy part is, and I just remember I went through this 1 2 day period and it was on a weekend, and it was the just most terrible feeling that like I ever went through. And I remember I was like, I'm about to go to a psychiatrist. I was like, I'm about to get put on medication, like, so I'm about to just do it, and because like I just don't, this feeling right here is just so powerful. I just I can't break it, I felt like. And I remember this is, and I think this is going to be very helpful to someone. I remember feeling that the first day. And even when I was out, I was like, oh my God, I just can't handle this feeling. I remember walking into Walmart and everything was just so overwhelming. Like everything was just so overwhelming. I tried to go fishing. I just couldn't find no joy in the fishing. It didn't matter what I was doing. And I remember sitting there, me and my buddy were like, hey, you want to watch a movie? And I was like, sure. And I watched the movie Twisters, the new one that came out with Glenn Powell. And I remember by the end of the movie, I was like, I looked back and I was like, oh wow, like I was really fine, and that it was the power of distracting yourself and focusing your energy on something else, and it'll start slowly coming down. And so, like, that's one of my things. Movies help me out a lot because I could direct my energy at it a lot. Yeah, that was probably not, I wouldn't say the turning point, but that really like showed me that like what you had written down in the DP manual really kind of showed like just something so simple would just take your mind off of something, and it'll show you that uh everything's fine. It's just once you start really learning that, I feel like once you see the turning point of that what you're saying actually does work, it makes everything a lot more easier to move forward.
I hope you're enjoying Austin's recovery story. Just a quick reminder that when you feel ready to start your recovery story, you can instantly download my step-by-step guide, the DP Manual. In this structured course, I will personally guide you through the entire DPDR recovery process with over 10 hours of video and audio not available on YouTube or anywhere else. It's completely digital and works on any device, including your phone and tablet. It's the same guide that Austin used and everyone else in these recovery stories. He recovered, they recovered, and when you feel ready, you can too. The link is in the video description. Now, back to the interview. The feeling of being stuck in a dream and disconnection, I mean, I can so relate to that as well, Austin. As I'm sure, most people watching the interview who are going through DPDR can. And when we see things like, the reason that happens, of course, is because it's part of your body and brain's fight or flight response. It creates a feeling of disconnection between you and the world around you, so that if you're in physical danger, it creates a buffer between you and it. It allows you to get away from it. This is why people describe, people in war zones and people in burning buildings describe this feeling all the time of like, I felt like it wasn't happening to me. It felt like I wasn't really there, but I got out of it, But when that's happening, when you don't have an explanation for it, when you're perfectly safe, the building isn't on fire, then you start to think, okay, what's going on? And then you start to think, maybe this is schizophrenia. Maybe I'm having a psychotic break. I certainly thought that, it was the best explanation I could come up with.
Yeah.
Now, I had 100 other explanations as well, like from fearing that I had developed dementia to multiple personality disorder to I was in purgatory, I had died, all this range of different explanations, which all felt like they made sense at the time, mainly because I didn't have a better explanation until I found the term DP and DR. And even then, that didn't switch it off, because it took me some time to convince myself to be like, okay.
Is this really it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when you come across the explanation, because when you've been kind of convincing yourself for weeks that or even longer that, oh, this is schizophrenia, you've convinced yourself of that. And then you see the explanation that says, this is just your levels of anxiety going up like that and coming down like that. There's a part of you that says nah, it's not that simple. It can't be that simple. Like what I'm experiencing is I feel cut off from reality. That's not anxiety. And then you learn that, no, that is exactly what anxiety does, especially fight or flight anxiety. It actually does make you feel cut off from yourself and the world around you. People who have panic panic attacks experience this all the time. It's extremely common. Most people will experience it. Um, yeah, and the feeling as well of feeling nothing towards anybody. Your hometown, your mom's place feeling unfamiliar. It's so frightening. It's so destabilizing. It feels just like everything that you know and you understand has been kind of pulled away. um, and you mentioned something about this earlier as well, Austin. You said the flow state has been switched or has been interrupted, and that's kind of essentially all it is, you know. Because what I found when I recovered was, you know, I would have that same thing where I'd be at my parents' house, for example, and I would feel like this place doesn't feel familiar to me, and that would really freak me out. And I would keep checking to see, is it familiar now? I know this room. This is the room I slept in when I was growing up. This is the room I watched movies in. You know, this is the et cetera, et cetera. And what you realize in recovery is that it's the checking that is keeping that going. You know, and when I recovered and I went back to spend time with my parents, it's not like I was thinking to myself, oh, this place feels familiar to me. You're not in a familiar place saying to yourself, this feels familiar. It's just that you've stopped interrupting the normal flow state that allows you to navigate that, you know?
Yeah.
It's the constant checking that keeps it going. But it's understandable. I don't blame myself for that. Like, I look back at it and I think, I mean, I didn't, until I had a better explanation, it felt like, I mean, at one point I thought I was like a spirit, like walking around and I died, like, you know, it was terrifying.
Oh, I could definitely know like what you're saying. Um because that, I mean, essentially, yeah, like it just the the constant checking was probably the one of the biggest issues. And once you kind of stop checking, because like I remember I would be anywhere and I would check, you know, and honestly, we have a similar story. Your story that how you were on the beach and there's a beautiful sunset and it's just something so beautiful and um you're freaking out and I'll never forget I was out fishing with my buddies on the lake and it's just beautiful sunset and I'm out here just not having it. You know, it's just like I'm not having it. I'm like just, you know, and I would say another big reason is like, you know, you constantly check and then when you're constantly checking, it constantly reminds you of this is there. And the more of it you do fight it or the more you do put energy and feel the fire, the longer it's going to stay and the more intense, you know, because I would say a lot of people just like me and you and whoever have experienced it at the strongest it's, you know, ever been. uh and yeah, it you know, and when you're kind of going through that, it's I feel like for me it was hard to kind of even notice when it was going down a little bit, you know, because it just you're focusing so much on it. You're trying to micromanage it. When you micromanage it, it's like, well, is it at 90% or is it at 85%? I don't know, you know, and it's just once you kind of take that, you know, kind of live your life. Like that was probably one of the last things I told my therapist because I remember I had a therapist and I was constantly going to him and he was trying to help out the best he was. But he didn't know what depersonalization was, you know what I'm saying? Like um I told him that I read your book, talked to you twice, and he was really astonished. He was like, "You've talked to the author of the book twice?" I was like, "Yeah." And he was just like, I don't know, he just kind of was like really surprised that I would do something like that. And I went to him for so long, even I remember like, you know, we had a talk and he was like, just go, you know, just go live your life, essentially. And because he was like, what do you think's the problem? I said, I think the problem is I'm not living my life because I allowed it to bring me into a spot where I was afraid to leave the house sometimes, you know, because the outside world, not because I'm afraid to go out and do stuff, it's because the outside world's very overwhelming, right? Like everything's very over, even back in like September, I felt a little sick, and I was not sick, but I felt a little congested, pressure, kind of felt when I get sick already, I always feel off since I was a little kid. Like it was just like, oh, I just don't feel the 100%. And I remember I had to go to Nashville. It's like a 30-minute drive after work. And I was supposed to go to this chicken spot, meet up with some friends I haven't, seen in a very long time. And I remember I was like, I don't know if I should go out that way. It's like everything just started feeling overwhelming for me. And I remember it was like that was like that was the last time that I really felt anything uh DBDR related at all, because I remember I was driving into downtown and there was so many cars and all this stuff, and I was still like 20 minutes away, and I was like, oh, traffic's gonna be real hectic. And this is at night, it's starting to get nighttime, so it's like the brake lights and the headlights coming, so it's like so many cars and all this stuff. And I called my grandma. I said, "Yeah, I'm turning around." And I wouldn't say I let it win. It was just like I was like, I'm just gonna take myself out of an overwhelming situation. And by the time I hit one exit, turn around, and just told my buddies to say, because I was gonna meet them later that weekend, anyways. Um, I kind of was just like, just kind of like went away, and I was like, it's nothing really to stress about. But I could definitely see why people can struggle, because the a lot of stuff is overwhelming. Outside can be overwhelming. The sky, the trees, raining, the wind, the sun, brightness. I remember brightness was one of the biggest problems, but it was weird. I would always check on my pupils, and my pupils would never be dilated, like really big. They'd be real, what do they call it, stagnant or something, where they're really tiny, but that also retracts a lot of light into your vision too, and it causes from anxiety and adrenaline, um just as like how your pupils will be, dilated too. So even though, because I'd always remember you say your eyes would be dilated, letting as much information in, mine wouldn't be dilated, they'd be like really really tiny, but at the same time it's letting a lot of light in, and everything would feel so overwhelming. And I'd just be like, oh my god, like just being at work, um I'd wear sunglasses, and so sunglasses would help. uh yeah, sunglasses did help a lot in that situation. But um yeah, I would say right there, just checking on it is probably the biggest issue that I've ran into to kind of stop the process. Sorry, I was jumping all over the place.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. That's really interesting. And I think that when you said that micromanaging it, that's, you hit the nail on the head there. That's exactly it. Like we try to micromanage the symptoms and the variations of the symptoms and what symptoms are happening at this time and that time. And I mean, it just becomes an obsession. It certainly did for me. You're trying to kind of like find the little tweaks that'll make this better, that better. And then when we realize that we can let that go and start, and as you said, like you go and you watch Twisters of all things, and you feel a bit better after. It doesn't switch it off, but it feels a bit better, and it's just like that's it. Like and I mean, of course, it's not as simple as that, but it's a great illustration of just how under your control this actually is. If you can go and watch a movie and enjoy it and you feel a little bit better afterwards, then that shows you that this is completely under your control, and you don't need to go into the fine tuning every little bit of it. Like, you can take the hands off it and focus elsewhere, and all of this micromanagement will take care of itself. Um, and so you had been seeing a therapist at the time, Austin, as well. Was that, if you don't mind me asking, was that a therapist specifically for anxiety, or was that a general therapist?
I would say overall, I definitely know that they dealt with like different, not just your generalized anxiety and depression. They had some doctors working there. I think what they ended up my diagnose that they kind of said was something about with dissociation, with some high sensory overload. I don't know. It was just something. Um, no, no, no hate to my therapist whatsoever. He was a great guy. One of the things that kind of stopped me from going from him was I remember I was telling him like I would tell him about my symptoms of like eye sense, the sensitive light, or how would I be? I would tell him like everything just feels really amplified, like really loud. Not saying it out of my ears, just saying everything that's coming at me light. Uh, and he wanted me to go get tested to see if I had like spectrum one autism, and I said, but I don't think I got autism. I said, and at that point, I was very dependent, like, with going through him. And I remember I said, hey, let's actually skip a week. And he goes, all right. Well, he goes, well, actually, hey, I'll be out of town the next week, so we could do it this time. And I said, all right. And then, uh, after that, like, I just never kind of rescheduled with him. And I just went and lived life. And, that I think that was at around the same time I stopped listening to the manual too, or I started really winging myself off. Because I remember, like, I used to listen to it every day. I would go back and play certain parts. The tip videos really were the key factor because they're 4 30-minute long videos. Those were real nice. So kind of just re-listening to those. Um, and then I got to a point where I stopped listening to them. At that same time, I stopped going to the therapist. And I wouldn't necessarily say that's when everything started getting better 100%. It was still a long journey, but like, yeah, the message was so burned into my head, kind of like just the main factors of what you need to do. And at that point, I just kind of just started just kind of going back into life, and working through a lot of it and just kind of keep on pushing and going through it.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And you're absolutely right. When I, with all the information in the DP manual, um, there's so much positive reinforcement in it, but you get to a point with it where you have internalized all that information and you start to, move away from it. And that's a very important part of the process. It's like any, any anxiety, a medical health professional who specializes in anxiety will say, you have to stop scratching the itch. You
Yeah.
can, at some point you have all the answers that you need. But you now have to train yourself away from asking the questions. Same with changing any habit, that takes time, takes a bit of effort, but it works. It works every time. Um, just to rewind a little bit, Austin, something I always like to ask people is, what was the lowest point in the whole experience? Is there any specific time that stays with you?
Um, that's a really good question. I would probably say I could sort it out in two. I already brought one up, and it was probably the weekend that um, it was the weekend that I just felt just completely just I don't know, it was just the most unexplainable feeling I could explain that I don't know, it was just so weird going through all of it from the morning. And, and actually I emailed you that night that I was going through in that weekend, and um cuz it was just all so much, just the feeling just disconnected, nothing around, just this kind of life that I was living in. It just nothing felt right, and it honestly, it would freak me out, but at the same time, it almost wouldn't freak me out because I'm just like, what am I going through? Like, why am I going through this? I was just kind of just in a super gray area with this, very frustrated at it. I was like, well, I just would love for this to go away in life, and it's like I just can't get it to go away. I would say that, and then I would say actually, I went to work. I can't really remember, but I went to work and I didn't feel well. And so I was like, I'm gonna, leave and I'm gonna go to the doctor's. And I remember I was on the phone with a buddy at work, and while I was driving there, I kind of felt like I know where I'm at, but it doesn't feel like I know where I'm at. And that right there is a scary feeling. I go to, I'm going in a town where I've gone thousands of times, I'm going into town. I'm like, why do I feel like I don't know where I'm at? And I ended up making it to the doctor. I'm walking around, pacing back and forth into this fast clinic, walking back and forth. And then they had me a sheet. I was like, what a coincidence this is. They had me a sheet. Have you been experiencing anxiety lately? I said, lady, you don't understand what have I been experiencing lately. And because apparently they could do online psychiatrists. And I was like, I'm not gonna feel this out right now, but I went through that, and it was just like I was scared to that right there, that alone, that feeling of knowing where I'm at but not knowing where I'm at kind of feeling, that scared me so bad that it stopped me, make me want to go go out and kind of go adventure or go far from my house. I would try to put myself in a safety circle of like, here's my house. Okay, if I'm there, I can make it back home this fast. Um, and that kind of rendered me from going to a lot of places, going to experience a lot of things, and that kind of really put me in this bubble, and which was only feeding it worse because now I got a fear of going out and driving far places, which is never me. Like I could go out and drive 3 hours, which, back in the day, like I remember having a little anxiety because I was driving to this place that's 2.5 hours away by myself and I'd never been there. But what I did is I went out and did it. And so the first time it was easy, or it was a little bit hard. And then the second time it was easier. And the third time I was doing it, it's like, oh, this is natural, And so I remember I was like, completely different situation. That was just, I felt a little anxious about going somewhere. And so what I ended up having to do is I had to tell myself that if I got to get out of this bubble, because now my lowest point put me into this bubble of I don't want to go out. I want to feel safe, so like, or I will go out, but I don't want to be far from my house, just because my house turned into my safe place. And so what would end up happening is like, I would just have to start going out a little bit further. Like my grandparents live about an hour and a half away. And I remember starting this podcast, my sister's adopted family, her dad is a country singer, and I was like, hey, let's do an episode. So I drove out to him, and he lives in about 45 minutes away. And so what I did is, and I've been there before, so I was like, all right. And I remember getting on the road, heading towards him, and I'm like, this feels a little scary. But what I did is I pushed through it, and I made it back. And that was just kind of like you said, it's like your brain check marks it. And then so like the same thing when I went to my grandparents the first time. It's like this feels kind of a little bit off. I feel anxious. It's not going to feel the best. But I went out and did it. I made it back home safe. Everything's fine. Um, I mean, it just started happening overall. Like I remember traveling was something that helped me get out of my bubble. Went to Gatlinburg for 6 days. Got a cabin. Um, that was kind of like, I would say I was probably 50-60% recovered in that moment, 70% recovered. I would say 70% recovered, but I was still kind of going through, like, oh crap, I'm 3 hours away now. What I'm saying, in the woods around black bears. So I gotta watch out. No, but it wasn't like that. But it was definitely like kind of just gotta live your life. Went to the water park there, and I had a great time. Got really sunburned and just kind of living life. And but yeah, is that the lowest point is what created me to have this little safety bubble, and I had to learn how to get back out and start doing stuff and becoming my old self of what would my older self before this do. And I would go out and do this. I wouldn't be afraid to go out here and drive to Nashville. I remember the first time that I sat there, or I was supposed to go to that chicken spot, Hattie B's, with my friends, and I ended up turning around that night. I was like, I don't feel the best. It's a little overwhelming, getting a little anxious. I'm gonna just head home. And I remember I was like, well, I'm off this Sunday. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go to Hattie B's by myself. And so I was like, the last time this drive kind of overwhelmed me, so I went and drove there, sat down, ate food, and I was like, you know what? I'm right by downtown Nashville. And I was like, what's one thing I haven't seen? I said, I haven't seen downtown Nashville in over a year. And I said, that's never me. So I was like, yeah, and so I drive through downtown Nashville, and I remember looking around, and I felt just such warm presence, like a warm feeling in the chest. I was like, wow, like I remember when like a time like this would scare me, but like I'm out here, it's like, you know what, like this is fine. Like I'm driving through all the skyscrapers and all that. And then I actually head back into town. And that same day I actually went right back to Nashville. I had to go do something else with the buddies. And yeah, that was kind of the realization, is like, wow, I really made it out of that safety bubble that I put myself in.
The mistake we often make is we think, well, I'll wait until the anxiety is gone, then I'll go to Nashville. And it's like, no, you push yourself into doing it, you don't have to go and do like a 3-week road trip to prove a point, but
Yeah.
you do have to start making little incremental changes. Like, just for me, it was getting into my car and just driving for 15 minutes, put on some music and just come back, just to show myself that I can drive my car. I'm not gonna crash it. I'm not gonna lose consciousness. Like, I can just drive for 50 minutes and come back. And then 2 days later, I drive for 25 minutes and come back. Then the next day, I put on an audiobook and drive for 40 minutes and come back, but just showing to yourself, I can do this. I can do this, which leads me to my next question, Austin. People often, I know you've heard people ask this before. What does recovery feel like? Is it a slow burn? Was it for you like a moment of realization? What was it like when you kind of got to the point where you said, this is actually happening, I'm actually recovering,
It was definitely a slow burn. And the reason why I would say it's a slow burn is because I would have good weeks and I'd have bad weeks, and I'd have one good week, 2 bad weeks, it'd feel like. Um, and then the moment that I realized that what recovery was is I would stop checking up on myself so much, and I'd check up on myself maybe once a day while I'm driving. I'm like, oh, does this feel right? And I'd be like, oh, well, it is what it is. And I go home and start messing around with other stuff. And to be honest, like I told you, I was like, in that email, it's like I recovered months ago. I just forgot to tell you about it, and it's like you end up like, I remember sitting at this is I remember, like, when I said I was about 70% recovered, I remember sitting up in Gatlinburg just in my mind, and I was like, Shaun O'Connor, why does that name ring a bell to me? And I was like, that's the guy, that's the DP manual. I was like, I literally forgot who you were for a second. And I was like, that's when it really kind of showed me. That was back in July. That really kind of showed me. I was like, your brain can really forget this stuff. You can really, the other day, I said depersonalization to myself. And I said, is that the right term for it? Like, I would just start forgetting about this stuff. I'm like, wait, yeah, it's called depersonalization. I was like, so it really gets to that point that the less you focus on it, is the less I focus on it, the less I started telling people what's going on. I remember I talked to my grandparents every day, and I would tell my friends, I don't know, I'm not feeling the best, and I just stopped talking about it. And they realized, even if I'm not 100% recovered, my friends and my family started realizing, oh, wow, he's getting better. Like, what's actually happening? He is getting better. And then, so when people would tell me that, it would kind of really show me that, like, oh, wow, I am getting better. Even when moments it didn't feel like I'm 100% there. And, um, recovery, yeah, was slow. It was boring. It was kind of frustrating at times. I would sit there and be like, why can't I recover as fast as some other people can? And I realized that, it's my story, not theirs. And I'm the one that's writing down, the chapters. So I would say that it taught me a lot for it to be slow. It taught me patience. It taught me, you know, a lot of things that I take into life now that are surprisingly out of this very bad situation that I went through. I take a lot of good from it, of who I am now today. Um which is phenomenal, so like recovery was slow, but like with it being slow and with me learning all this stuff, it showed me like uh something that's like sticks around, you know. For me, listening to that book 1,000 times, for me listening to those videos nonstop all day like a podcast. Yeah, I wouldn't even know how long it took me from February. I couldn't even tell you really when I felt like I recovered. It just kind of just happened. And like, what people say that in the interviews, it just kind of just happened, I don't know if it was August, September, November, just live life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It kind of just happens. The example I always like to give is, it's like if you had a song stuck in your head and the song was for a couple of days driving you crazy, and then a few weeks later, someone said to you, "Hey, you remember you had the song stuck in your head?" And you say, "Yeah," and they say, "What was it like forgetting about that song?" It'd be almost impossible to describe it because
Yeah.
it just happened. It just happened in the background while you were listening to other music because you stopped checking. If it was there, it was there, but it's not your business anymore. You're doing other stuff. It just happens in the background. Um, you really do forget about it. You even forget me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shaun O'Connor. That rings a bell.
Yeah.
um, it's the way when you're going through it, it feels so all-consuming that like you think I will never be able to stop thinking about this. I remember thinking like the thoughts and feelings I had were so profoundly terrifying and intrusive and destabilizing. I remember thinking that like even if I can quote unquote recover, I'll never be the same again. Like because these thoughts are so awful and so disturbing, and this feeling is just like absolutely terrifying. I'll never really get back to normal. And then you recover, and it's just like it's gone. It's like it's
Yeah.
all gone, and you are completely back to normal. And it's you think of it in the same terms as if you had take another symptom of anxiety like muscle tension in your shoulder. If you had muscle tension in your shoulder for like a couple of weeks, okay, it's not pleasant, and it's okay, and you grabbed your attention from time to time, but then it's gone, and then it's a thing that happened. It wasn't comfortable, but now it's gone. And the only reason I was thinking about it, the DPDR in such catastrophic terms, was because I didn't understand what was going on. In the same way that someone else might notice that twinge in their shoulder and go, "Oh my God, I've got cancer." Like
Yeah.
you know, uh, no, and it's like no, it's just your shoulder, it's tension in your shoulder. The, you know, you don't need to jump to that catastrophic interpretation. And when you understand what it is and it relaxes and you can let it go, it's just gone. Along with all the other catastrophic interpretations. The thing you mentioned about friends and family noticing your recovery as well is really good, really interesting, Austin. Because, when we're going through DP and DR or any anxiety based condition, it feels like glacially slow. It feels like just the slowest possible thing. And because you're the one going through it, it's very difficult for you to actually have a practical, like objective sense of how well you're doing, right?
Yeah.
So when you see your friend, then your friends or family see you, especially maybe like friends who you haven't seen in a while, and then they see you and they're like, "Oh wow, you're doing much better. You look better. You're kind of you're sleeping a bit better. You're like, am I? you know,
Yeah.
and they're like, yeah, you are. And you're like, okay, cool. Even the thing of like, I remember like when I was going through DPDR, like walking past like shop windows and seeing my reflection and being shocked at how normal I looked. Because in my head, I was like going through some sort of like existential like break in the time space continuum. And I just see myself in the shop window and I'm just like, I'm Shaun,
Yeah.
I'm a bit skinnier than I used to be, but I don't look like I'm about to drop dead. It's so interesting. It's so interesting how kind of we and how our friends and family see us and go like, oh, but you seem to be fine, and that can be, and that shows you the distance or the gulf between how bad we think it is, and then when other people see us and go like, well, you seem to be much better than you were. And the last thing I mentioned in that is the worry that you had that, why can't I recover as quickly as this person or that person? And this is
Yeah.
something I experienced too. So it sounds scary when you say, oh, well, this person recovered in like 3 weeks, but it's been now it's been like 5 weeks for me. So what's going on? And it feels scary when you're going through it, but like all that's showing you is that like people get anxiety based conditions. 1 in 3 people will develop an anxiety based condition. Now, everyone can recover from them. People recover from them every day of the week. Um, of course, it takes people different amounts of time to recover. Like, of course it does. There's
Okay.
so many different factors involved. People can, I mean, God knows, even when I found out the correct things to do, it took me a while to get into the proper kind of discipline of doing them properly, of to like stopping researching and all the rest of it. So it just takes people different amounts of time to recover. That's all. But when we see that in practice and we say, oh, well, I've been trying to recover now for like 5 weeks, and then but that person says he recovered in 3, and then you kind of go, oh my God, what's wrong? What am I doing? And it's all just doing more and more checking in.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's micromanaging. It's micromanaging. It's what you're not focusing on is the fact that you've made loads of progress in those couple of weeks. But what you're saying and what anxiety focuses on is, oh yeah, but that other dude recovered in 3 weeks, so
Yeah.
you're doing something wrong. It's like you're not doing something wrong. You're making progress here. You're on the right track.
Oh, 100%. Because that was one of my biggest worries. Like, I would see people have it. Like, there was a guy that you had on recently. That sometimes I would just kind of hop back on the channel and play a video. A guy had it for, I guess, 6 weeks. I don't remember his name or nothing. But 6 weeks he got it. And then he was over. And I remember thinking to me, I was like, wow, it took like 6 months, it felt like, to get over. And I was like, but everyone has, it just depends on how dedicated you are. I think it's like you said, it's the fear of letting go. You've said this before. It's the fear of letting go that if this doesn't work, then nothing's going to work. I am doomed, and it's kind of like, uh, and I would say it's the change, just like how you said how uh it taught me a lot about mental health, what you're saying about recovery, because it's all about a habit-based form. Although that, like, we hate being in it, you get so well into a habit of staying in it, so not even meaning to, it just, you subconsciously. And then, as one thing, a lot of people don't like change, even though you say you want it, it's like, a lot of people don't like change in life until the change actually happens. And then you kind of learn, like, oh, that wasn't as bad as what I thought. I don't know if that's a good kind of way to put it, but uh that's just kind of like how I looked out of it, is like that, like, there's a lot of people that are stuck in it for so long, whether if it's 6 months to a year, to 2 years. That's why you see some people are stuck in the depression, and it's not like they want to be stuck in the depression. It's just you're so used to the habit of waking up and, oh, today's the same day. this and that. But like until you actually start putting in the effort to go out there and kind of change your life and do the correct steps that you need to get better, um, it's not gonna happen, and you're gonna wake up feeling the same thing every day. Um, like that's like something you said in the videos. And I can't remember exactly what you said, but I remember it's like you got real stern at the very end, which I liked it. You know what I'm saying? Like, uh, I don't know. And it's crazy because I watched those videos so much, and I can't remember what the last thing you were talking about. But what I do remember is that you were real firm on what you're saying. Just stop researching it, stop this. You know, and yeah, I feel like researching holds people back on their recovery. The one thing I don't recommend it whatsoever, but ChatGPT, because that's something we got now. It uh I used it. It helped me out a little, I guess, because it was more positive. It's a sandbox version of asking it questions and pulling stuff. And I even asked it about you, like during my recovery, and it said, "Oh yeah, Shaun's a trustworthy person to go to. His DP, manual and stuff like that's helped so many people." But like, it still gets wishy washy. There's some people on YouTube that, I mean, you got this guy over here. I mean, there's a thumb title saying distracting yourself doesn't work. I mean, you're like, oh my God. I mean, it puts you back another 2 or 3 days of like, well, do I even trust what's going on? So I think there's a lot of reasons why some people kind of take the information and start automatically applying it. I mean, some people are kind of like, I don't know about this, uh, is this gonna work? And but once you trust it, because I wouldn't want to say I'm skeptical, but I was uh skeptical in some things. Like, I don't know, this just sounds too good to be true on how to recover. Uh, but no, it is good and it is true that you can recover.
Yeah, 100%. And like skepticism is good. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
100%, 100%. I mean, I would have been. I was skeptical when I came across the stuff first, and also, like all the stuff in the DP manual is it's not stuff that I came up with. It's the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. And all that I did was I synthesized all of that stuff, which works for anxiety-based conditions, and I focused it on the symptoms of DP and DR, which hadn't been done in one single book back when I had the condition. Um, I mean, it it works. Like it just works. I mean, and there's like decades of clinical and therapeutic experience across these different modes of therapy that prove that, and it's the exact same for DP and DR. And also, Austin, did you find our Zoom one-to-one coaching sessions helpful?
Oh, 100%. So to actually be able to ask you questions, I think in a moment where I didn't even know if I was going through DPDR, even though that you're not a medical professional, that I've always said that the fact that you've been through it, like I would tell people that I was like, the fact that this guy's been through it, I would trust him over a therapist that's had a perfect life, um, that's got a degree. You know what I'm just saying? I was like, that people who actually go through it can actually help other people that are going through it. Um, and even my therapist said that. He was like, the only reason why I'm in therapy is because I went through something in my life and I figured, you know what, I can help people out, and I was like, you know what? That is true. Because if because it's a real thing that people never experience anything. Like I have people that never experience what I'm going through, or even generalized anxiety. It's like, oh, I don't got anxiety like that. I've had people that say they don't even believe in anxiety, and I say, well, hold on, everyone has it. I was like, when the cops pull you over and your heartbeat starts bumping a little bit, I said, yeah, because you're speeding. But when people don't go through that, they don't understand what you're going through. And it's very hard to kind of explain to them. But the fact that you went through there and I could sit there and talk to you on Zoom, um, halfway across the world, and you know, kind of just, you know, to ask questions and what's your opinion on what's going on, and you answer it in the simplest form. It really shows that like is one of the most beneficial parts. You know, I would say I wouldn't. I mean, I don't know where I would be if I didn't do a Zoom coaching call, but I feel like I'd still be recovered. But it just helped things out.
That's great. I'm so happy that it was useful. So Austin, now that you've recovered from depersonalization and derealization, is getting back to normal really getting back to normal?
Yeah, getting back to normal is definitely normal. You just in your normal flow state. You just live life. You hop in your car. You don't think about, oh, am I anxious, too anxious to drive? It's just none of that. You know, it's just you live your life. You make plans with friends. You go to the bar. You go celebrate. You work on your hobbies. You go to work and you kind of just live life, you know, not even thinking about like what you really went through.
I got one more question for you, Austin. So there's going to be people watching this interview who may be going through something very, very similar to what you went through. Like speaking to those people directly, what advice would you have for them?
I would definitely say that trust the process. Like Shaun says, you don't have to believe that you're going to recover to recover, but um, you know, um, don't put focus on this. It's like adding, you know, wood to the fire and watching it burn hotter. Um, just live life, you know, even as scary as it seems, the, you know, as anxious, the, you know, the out of body experiences, the not feeling like in reality, go live life. And you know, the just keep your mind focused on other stuff than what anxiety is, and it might take you time and time and again. Don't worry about the timeline whatsoever. Like Shaun says, don't worry, I need to be better in 5 weeks. Just kind of live life, you know, it just naturally happens. Because I remember in moments I was like, wow, this is never gonna end. And now I'm sitting on this other side of the screen instead of a coaching call, um, talking to you and to the viewers, and kind of, you know, realizing that, wow, you know, it's like an accomplishment. You know, that was one of my goals. But just focus on yourself and kind of just live life. That's my biggest message. Just live life. Even when it's really hard, it feels like you can't, you definitely can, you know, because I felt like I went through everything, just like a lot of us recover, the people who recovered. um Yeah. Biggest message is just live life and don't focus on it so much, even when it feels like it's the only thing you can focus on.
That's
And
great
I, and,
advice.
and I would say I got one question for you, if that's all right.
Sure.
Just one curiosity question. So, for you, the one who created the manual, do you think in the situation, how do you think in the situation that when, let's say, instead of you creating the manual, if someone presented you the manual that you created, but like, you know, how do you think it like would have benefited you? Because I feel bad that you had to create everything from this site and then the over here and there. Think if someone handed, like, how do you feel if someone like handed it to you while you were going through it?
You know what? That's a great question. The reason I wrote the manual was because first of all, I was shocked that there wasn't a single like text that was there for people with DP and DR. If my anxiety had manifested as say agoraphobia, I could have gone to the bookshop down the road and found a book about agoraphobia and started reading it, right? If it had manifested as social anxiety disorder, if it had manifested as uh, claustrophobia, I would have had a clear path to recovery for all of those things, right? But because it manifested as DP and DR, I felt like there was nothing there to help me. No one could even tell me what was happening. I remember feeling like a rug had been pulled out from under me, and I was lying on the ground, and nobody could help me, and I couldn't help me, and it was awful. But when I realized as I recovered that, as I was saying earlier, that all of the information to get out of this is there. It's because the same fundamental processes that are used in CBT and acceptance and commitment therapy, which are again are proven to work with all of these other anxiety-based conditions. Once you apply those and just maybe kind of um, fine
We,
tune them specifically, tweak
yeah,
them exactly for DP and DR, they work. Like, of course they work.
yeah,
How could they not? Of course they work. So because I've been journaling a lot through the process, and because I enjoy writing anyway, and I'd written for a local newspaper and stuff, and just some stuff for magazines and things like that. I was like, well, I should probably collate this and put it into a little text. But the first version of it was like a little PDF, like that I just started sending into the forums that I've been in and such. The but I wrote it to be the book that I would have wanted to read when I first got DP and DR.
mm,
That just would explain to me what was happening, that would calm me down, and that would give me just start. It wouldn't promise that I was going to recover overnight, but it would just say, okay, here's the path you're going to walk down. As we were saying, going back to the path, like, here's the
yeah,
path you're going to walk down. It'll take patience and discipline and consistency, but it will work. It can't not work. And as you
yeah,
were saying, I'm not sure. Like, I don't believe this is going to work. It will work.
yeah,
There's a lovely phrase that says, "You are equipped to help the person you used to be,"
mm,
and that's kind of what I think about all of that stuff. That I don't. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional at all, or what I ever claim to be. But I do feel like I am equipped to help Shaun back in 2005 and all of the people who I've spoken to in the meantime. So, it's been a joy to do it.
there's a quote that I found last year that kind of helped me with life, and especially going through this is I took the E off of emotion and been on the move ever since. And when I took the emotions and turning it into motion, I kind of just it just kind of everything fell into line. Same like your path. You take because there's a lot of emotions you're going through, and when you take that out, when you take the emotions out of the situation, and you just kind of put your head down and I'm going to get out of this and follow. You will. That has been my biggest thing.
Yeah, 100%. Austin, before we go, I'd just like to mention that because you talked about having a podcast earlier.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, if you're happy for me to share that in the video description, I'll maybe send people some people over. So if anyone watching this wants to check out Austin's podcast, or any other links you'd like to send over, we'll put those in the video description.
Okay.
And yeah,
Yeah. Right now it's under Crashville Entertainment. And so we got on the podcast is the Crashville Show. And that's just the podcast form of what goes around. Uh, that's just my podcast area. I interview people, and I also have a co-host that comes on every so often, and we just discuss what's going on in the world or whatever. But most of the time, I try to interview people, and also creating it into entertainment brand. Like I said, I've done something with Hattie B's Chicken, like a food review kind of video, and went to Nashville and did like a couple street interviews, and um I'm about to do a dating show series here in the next month or so, just kind of adding anything in entertainment. But yeah, it's Crashful Entertainment, and I could send you the link to put it underneath here if you want.
fantastic. Looking forward to checking it out. And anyone who's watching the video, go and check it out as well. Austin, it's been so lovely to speak with you, man. I really, really enjoyed this, and thanks for taking time to share your story. I'm so happy that you've recovered. I remember speaking to you on the Zoom coaching sessions, and you were going through a difficult time. So it makes me very, very happy to see that you fully recovered, and that the work in the DP manual and the coaching sessions were useful along the way. So thanks so much for your time, man. And keep up the good work, and enjoy life post recovery, and take care of yourself. Right?
I appreciate it.